Good day, this is Mr. K's, and we're talking about 14.4, A Century of Turmoil, in which you have the church facing some problems, you have a disease that's going to strike Europe, and you also have a war that's going to last over 100 years between France and England. Let's start here with problems in the church. We've seen throughout the Middle Ages that popes and kings are going to fight each other at times for ultimate power. Now, we saw before Henry IV that was sorry he called the Pope a false monk, and in sackcloth and ashes, in a snowstorm, he comes to the Pope's castle and pleads for forgiveness. Oh, forgive me. Well, it shows that the Pope is more powerful than the king. Here we're going to see Philip IV is going to set the rule of kings above the Pope or papal rule. The Pope stated in essence that in order to be saved, all kings must always obey the Pope. He issued what was called a papal bull, P-A-P-A-L, B-U-L-L. A papal bull is just nothing more than a pope's statement. But he said all kings must obey all popes all the time. Get it? Got it? Good. Well, Philip IV said, I'm not going to obey. And what he did is he took the elderly Pope hostage in his castle. The Pope was eventually rescued, and a month later this elderly Pope died. The importance here is that no more would kings bow down to popes. Popes could not force kings to bow down. That's going to be important. Now, we're going to see some changes. Avignon is a city in France, and the papacy, or the Pope, is going to move his castle from Rome to Avignon, France. And this is going to create a great schism or split in the church. In doing so, the papacy moves from Rome to Avignon, as we said, creating this schism. And it's not until the Council of Constance meets, this gathering at the city of Constance, they have the task to end the great schism by choosing a new pope. Well, as it continues on, this great schism develops because not only do we have one pope, but we have two popes, and each is going to excommunicate the other. Eventually, a pope is going to be chosen, but it just shows how Roman Catholicism had some problems to deal with. We're going to see scholarly challenges to church authority that come from below the Pope. Scholars who criticize the church criticize their excesses of spending too much money and not taking care of the poor, and they were dealt with harshly. A churchman by the name of John Wycliffe, he was from England, stated that Jesus Christ, not the Pope, was the head of the church, and for that he was excommunicated from the church. He was far enough away from Rome so he did not fall into the hands of the church court and get burned at the stake. But poor Jan Hus, who was Bohemian, B-O-H-E-M-I-A-N, that's ancient Czechoslovakian, he was a churchman who was excommunicated for the belief that the Bible was a higher authority than the Pope. Now, these challenges to authority are not going to go unmet. And he was lured down to the Council of Constance under the guise that he was supposed to help to end this great schism. When he arrived at the Council of Constance, he was taken prisoner, put on trial, and eventually burned at the stake for heresy. Again, heresy is going against the church's beliefs. So we see that men that rose up and challenged the authority of the Pope or the church in general might actually lose their place in the church, and in this case Jan Hus lost his life. In the 1300s, you're going to see a disease that sweeps through England. It's called the bubonic plague. Now, buboes on a person's body are their lymphatic system. It's underneath your arms, it's in your neck, it's in your groin area, and the bubonic plague is going to affect those areas. You're going to have painful swelling. Now, this plague begins in Asia, and it's going to sweep across Europe, and it kills nearly 1/4 of the population. It's going to hit about 1347. This disease is also called the Black Death. Now, the origin, people trace it back to Asia, as I said, and some people seem to think it was from the Mongols. It began in Central Asia, and the Mongols, with their wagons full of grain, had rats in it, and on the rats were these fleas. And as people came in contact with it, they caught that sickness and they began to die. Over in China, millions of people died, and on the other side of the landform, in Europe, you had 1 out of every 4 people dying. So it begins in Central Asia through the Mongols. It's also known as, aka, the Black Death. The effects of the plague. Every few years, the plague is going to reduce the population and disrupt society, obviously. There was a lack of workers, and it broke down the manor system, or the manorial system. There were less people to work in the fields. And then finally, many people became disillusioned with the church because they prayed to the church, they prayed to God, help us, and the plague continued. So they were disillusioned with the church. They were pessimistic about the future, and they were preoccupied with pleasure. Like, I may die tomorrow, so I want to be happy today. So every few years, the plague is going to come back and hit. They had no clue how it was spread. They believed it was maybe bad air, or maybe it was spread through, I don't know. They had no clue. It was the fact that there was not a sanitary society. So lack of workers broke down the manorial system, and many became disillusioned with the church. 100 Years' War. 100 Years' War was actually over 100 years, and it was between France and England. It was a war between France and England, and it was over the struggle for land. Who was going to take over the land when the ancient or the elderly French king died? Well, the agreement was this young English man, this English noble, and you began to see France and England fight for that land. Now, it took over 100 years, and England won many battles, but they lost the war. The Battle of Crécy is going to pit France against England in the struggle for land. And it's here we see the English longbow. It's about as tall as a man, about 6 foot long, tall, was used to defeat the French, and it spelled the end of chivalrous warfare, in which you had tin can armor soldiers. It was not safe to be in that armor. Other battles, Poitiers and Agincourt. Again, victories for the English there. They won 2 more battles from the French in 1356 and in 1415. English longbows, again, are going to be victorious over mounted knights. It wasn't safe to be on horseback. It wasn't safe to be in tin can armor. Well, in this 100 Years' War, you have a French maiden, about a 15, 16-year-old girl named Joan of Arc. She was from a little village near Orléans, or Orleans, France, and she had visions at night that French saints were talking to her, and they encouraged her to fight against England, put on men's armor, lead the armies of France to victory, and crown the new French king. Well, as she does this, she does lead France to victory, but she was captured, and eventually she was executed by the Roman Catholic Church. They thought she was a witch. So, on May 30th, 1431, she was burned at the stake. And even though the 100 Years' War was won by England's many battles, France ultimately wins the war. That was a stupid way of saying that, but England won the battles, but France won the war. What was the impact here of the 100 Years' War? It gave rise to nationalism, or patriotism. It empowered the French king and the English Parliament, and it marked the end of the Middle Ages. In England, you had a civil war called the War of the Roses, in which you have the control for the throne being fought between the House of York and the House of Lancaster. Eventually, Lancaster is going to defeat York, and you have the rise of the Tudor monarchy. If you watch the show or the series The Game of Thrones, the War of the Roses is what it's based on. The results of the 100 Years' War, you have feelings of nationalism, you have the end of the age of chivalry, in which knights would rule, and then the church begins to lose some of its power and prestige. Why? Because of the Crusades being a debacle and the plague sweeping through. So the church is going to take a black eye here. This is Mr. K's, and we are out.